Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one.
The introduction. In the heart of Oakridge, a seemingly tranquil town nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, the arrival of autumn brought an unsettling chill. Cracked sidewalks crisscrossed the neighborhood, flanked by maple trees shedding rusty leaves like confetti of memory. Residents exchanged pleasantries, unaware that a shadow lurked just beyond the horizon. It was early October when 38-year-old city council member David Hughes vanished without a trace. A committed public servant and a well-liked figure, David was known for his kindness, always stopping to help elderly neighbors carry groceries. But on that fateful Saturday, he had no intention of returning to his cozy home, filled with the art he had created over the years. His absence marked the first real crack in the well-polished veneer of Oakridge. As the sun dipped below the horizon, David's wife, Jenna, felt a tightening in her chest. She had grown accustomed to David's occasional late nights at the office. Yet an annoying sense of worry pierced through the routine. When she finally decided to call, it was met with an eerie silence of silence that signaled the dreadful beginning of a mystery that would haunt the town. Hours turned into a sleepless night. The following morning, as the first rays of dawn broke through the fog, the local authorities received the frantic call from Jenna. Despite the tight-knit community's skepticism about something sinister occurring in their idyllic setting, whispers began to spread. What began as a concerned wife's phone call would spiral into a harrowing investigation that would reveal hidden lies, betrayals, and secrets buried deep within the foundation of Oakridge. The question loomed heavy. A victim. David Hughes was more than a city council member. He was a beacon of optimism, a man who wore his heart on his sleeve. Friends and family often praised his infectious laugh, a sound that seemed to resonate through the clutter of political tension and everyday life. Hailing from a humble background, he was the first in his family to earn a college degree. Driven by a desire to uplift his community, he had spent over a decade tirelessly advocating for sustainable development and public parks, believing Oakridge deserved more than the weight of its past. Yet beneath the surface of his cheerful demeanor lay a man wrestling with unfulfilled aspirations. Colleagues noted subtle changes in his behavior over the past few months. A pall of fatigue shadowed his features, and the sparkle in his eyes dimmed. The pressures of city politics, a role he once embraced, began to wear him down. Some whispered of his despair over a proposal for a new industrial zoning plan that conflicted with his vision for greener spaces. David, the dreamer, became caught in a web of contention and discord. As the investigation began to unfurl, detectives dug deeper into David's personal life. They gathered statements from those who knew him best. His lifelong friend Mark Caldwell described their last conversation, a seemingly innocuous coffee catch-up filled with talk of family and football. But even Mark sensed something amiss, a flicker of anxiety halting David's laughter mid-sentence. In contrast, Jenna painted a picture of a loving husband who had weathered the trials of married life with grace and warmth. Yet, the investigators noticed the lines of stress etched on her face, a motherly tenderness laced with uncertainty. Secrets and fears bubbled just beneath their surface, shrouded in the smiling photographs of their life together. As they searched David's office for clues, a sense of urgency took root, the clock ticking relentlessly against a backdrop of unanswered questions and mounting dread. Who had wanted to harm David? And what were they hiding? The crime scene. A cool, crisp breeze carried a sense of foreboding as detectives arrived at the edge of Oakridge's sprawling oak forest. The sun struggling to penetrate the heavy canopy above. The area had been cordoned off, marked by yellow crime scene tape fluttering like a warning flag against the tranquil backdrop. A deep hush clung to the air, making the ordinary sounds of crackling leaves and distant birdsong feel eerie and intrusive. Crisscrossing paths led the investigators to an isolated clearing, where tangled undergrowth gradually gave way to a space marred by recent disturbance. There lay the first sign of something profoundly wrong. A silver wristwatch, its glass cracked, glimmered dully amid the fallen leaves. It was David's watch, the one Jenna had gifted him on their 10th anniversary, a sentimental token, forever etched with moments of joy. As the team carefully scanned the perimeter, they noticed deeper disturbances in the soil that suggested scuffling. And further along, a rippling motion in the long grass had captured their attention. It heralded the discovery of a shallow, hastily covered grave. Equipped with metal detectors and shovels, the forensic team meticulously began to excavate the area, tension thick as they unearthed layer after layer of disturbed earth. With every scoop, the silence of the forest amplified the weight of their task. Hours later, the dull thud of shovels striking something solid broke the silence, an ominous sound that cast a shroud of despair over the event. Soon, with reluctant precision, they revealed a body. David Hughes. David Hughes, face down and lifeless, is still framed, stark against the damp, muted colors of the forest floor. The horror of the discovery was magnified by the chill in the air, and the gravity of the situation settled heavily upon the detectives. Initial assessments indicated no signs of obvious trauma, which conflicted with their expectations of violence. Instead, it appeared David had succumbed to something more insidious. As they gathered evidence, the reality sunk in. This was no mere disappearance turned sour, but the unfolding of a calculated and ruthless act. Each fragment of clothing, each detail of the scene, whispered secrets of a struggle, pointing toward motives deeper than mere ambition. They had to unravel this tragic tapestry before it unraveled them. The early investigation. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the Oakridge precinct as officers gathered for a briefing on David Hughes' death. Lines of urgency etched the sergeant's brow as he outlined the initial findings from the crime scene. David's body was sent for autopsy, but early indications suggested foul play. Whispers of suspicion began to swirl, not just around the community but also among the deputies who had stood in disbelief earlier that day. Detectives Rachel Monroe and Eric Bennett were assigned to lead the investigation. They initiated their inquiries with Jenna, whose eyes were puffy and red from a mix of tears and sleepless nights. Despite her grief, she struggled to answer their question. Jenna recounted the last few days leading up to David's disappearance, recalling fragments of anxious conversations that hadn't seemed significant. At the time, he had planned for a late-night work session at City Hall. A particular email that had harried his thoughts. A whispered name that slipped through his lips. Clark. Rachel paused, her pen poised above her notepad, noting the single mention like a thread waiting to be taut. Jenna stared blankly, the fear in her eyes morphing into confusion. He was a developer interested in the new proposal. David never liked him, said he was ruthless. I think they had a meeting last week. As the detectives pressed for more information, they sensed the unraveling of a storm of professional conflict that had sown discord into David's otherwise passionate pursuits. Motivations began to take shape. It seemed a growing tension surrounding the industrial rezoning was escalating into something more dangerous, but they needed concrete leads. With the interviews done, Rachel and Eric turned to the digital fingerprints left behind. David's email correspondence held hours of back-and-forth discussions around the proposal, and as they sifted through messages, one particularly explosive thread caught their eye. A heated exchange with Clark, marked by threats that hinted at added desperation and veiled aggression. The investigators leaned in closer, realizing they were embarking on a web strewn with entangled aspirations and malicious intent, setting the stage for the dark truths yet to unfold. The dead ends. Days turned into weeks. And the autumn air enveloped Oakridge, thick with a sense of unease. As investigators pursued every thread connected to David's murder, they found themselves ensnared in a web of dead ends. Each lead that once sparkled with promise quickly dimmed into a dull frustration. Detectives Monroe and Bennett returned to Clark's office, a sleek modern building erected in the heart of downtown, a stark contrast to David's quaint, homey office. Clark was charismatic and articulate, still reeling from the shocking news of David's death. However, the deeper they probed, the more slippery the man became. He spoke of respect for David's dedication to the community, yet threads of tension lurked behind his polished demeanor. Clark claimed ignorance about the emails, waving them away as heated professional banter. David was always exaggerating, he insisted. Smooth words sugarcoating sharp edges. Yet unease warped the conversation. Clark's alibi, a business trip during the days surrounding David's disappearance, had checked out, leaving investigators with nothing more than his word and an unsettling sense that he was hiding something. Frustrated but unwilling to relent, Rachel and Eric turned to the community, hoping for insights born from whispered gossip or lingering resentment. Yet the town seemed to cocoon itself in silence. Friends spoke of David nearly reverently, while others seemed withdrawn, fearful that speaking up could unleash consequences. Each conversation felt like a veil, masking the truth they desperately sought. A vital tip came from an unexpected source, a teenager named Timmy, who claimed to have spotted a black SUV loitering near the park during the time David had vanished. Yet despite canvassing the area, they failed to locate the vehicle or its owner. The town, once bright and welcoming, now felt trapped in a fog of disbelief and suspicion, and every lead crumbled beneath their feet, leading Rachel and Eric to wonder if their pursuit of justice was a futile endeavor. Yet, as they regrouped, the detectives reminded each other that while they stood at the edge of a precipice, the truth lay somewhere beneath, even if it remained concealed by layers of fear and silence. The eerie quiet of the town was not just the calm before the storm. It was an invitation to peel back the layers of deceit lurking beneath the surface. The stillness beckoned them forward into the shadows. A break in the case. The brisk air turned sharp as a storm rolled in, the clouds heavy and ominous above Oakridge. Detectives Monroe and Bennett shuffled through the precinct, a weight of stagnation settling in their chest. Days of chasing leads that led to nowhere had sapped their energy. Yet the relentless pursuit of truth kept them moving, tenaciously haunting the corners of their minds. On a seemingly ordinary afternoon, an unexpected call erupted through the precinct's silence. He was a local shopkeeper, Mrs. Watson, who owned a small convenience store just off Main Street. "I think I saw something last week," she said breathlessly, her voice shaky over the line. "It was late at night, black SUV. I thought I recognized it. I saw it parked near the park when that poor man went missing." Heart rates quickened as Rachel and Eric exchanged glances, renewed energy flooding their veins. They quickly arranged to meet Mrs. Watson, her words painting a picture of hope against the shadow. Once they arrived, she recalled that the SUV had been parked suspiciously. But it wasn't just the vehicle that piqued her interest. She had seen a man outside it, someone she thought belonged to the town. He looked familiar. It was Charles, the handyman. Eric's instincts sharpened. Charles, a fixture in Oakridge, had a reputation for being helpful, yet was often seen just beyond the edge of propriety. There were whispers of him taking odd jobs and having ties to the underbelly of local politics. Could he have been involved in something sinister? Rachel and Eric knew they had to act quickly. They rushed back to the precinct, updating their team on the breakthrough. Detectives quickly set up a stakeout to monitor Charles's usual haunts, a mix of apprehension and determination, fueling their resolve. As night fell once more on Oakridge, they watched intently, waiting for the handyman to make his move. Each ticking second felt like an eternity, anticipation thrumming in the air. Finally, their patience paid off. A familiar silhouette emerged, slipping into the same black SUV that had turned into a ghost from the past, leaving a trail of questions in his wake. Their connection to David's murder was unclear, but with a tangible lead finally in hand, Rachel and Eric were emboldened to delve deeper. The storm clouds above darkened, but within them sparked the first flicker of hope, a chance to unravel the threads binding Charles to the darkness that had enveloped their town. The suspect. The following morning dawned heavy with anticipation, the air thick with the remnants of last night's storm. Detectives Monroe and Bennett convened to discuss their next steps, fueled by the night's revelations. Charles seemed an unlikely suspect. The handyman had always been a benign presence in Oakridge, dutifully repairing fences and painting porches. Yet this new discovery transformed his familiar face into a potential perpetrator. They moved swiftly, assembling a profile on Charles Henderson. He was in his late 40s, a man of few words with a rugged demeanor belying an unpredictable nature. As they dug deeper, they discovered an unsettling past. Years ago, Charles had been implicated in a string of petty crimes. His name surfaced in weak neighborhood scuffles enough to raise eyebrows, but not enough for serious consequences. Coupled with whispers of a tumultuous relationship with David, Charles had unknowingly woven himself into the fabric of their investigation. Later that day, they orchestrated an interview with him at the precinct. When he arrived, Charles appeared outwardly calm, appearance disheveled, a hint of unease flickering at the corners of his mouth. Eric opened with innocuous questions, gouging Charles's demeanor. "How have you been, Charles? We haven't seen you around the neighborhood lately." Charles shrugged, leaning back slightly in his chair. "I have been busy working on a few projects." The response felt rehearsed. As they dove deeper into David's case and the sighting at the park, Charles stiffened visibly. "I was just passing through," he stumbled, the innocence in his eyes replaced by something darker, a shadow of guilt. that flickered at his edges. Rachel pressed further, carefully dissecting his alibi. With each question, they squeezed tighter, weaving through contradictions and half-truths. His memories of the night David went missing grew fuzzy, his confidence diminishing, until he finally sought to dismiss their concerns with a sweeping cop. "I hardly knew that man. We were acquaintances, nothing more." Yet those in the room could smell the desperation in his words. His tension was palpable, an undercurrent that flowed through the interrogation room, quietly magnifying suspicion. The look in his eyes told another story, a facade strained thin, betraying a knowledge lurking just beneath the surface. Rachel and Eric left the meeting with firm resolve. Charles's denials could no longer mask the suspicions held against him. The pieces were beginning to connect, creating trails that hinted at deeper entanglements. As they strategized their next move, the walls of Oakridge tightened around them, each conversation promising further revelations waiting in the shadows. The investigation was no longer about a tragic accident, but an unfolding puzzle that hinted at betrayal closer to home. The trial. The courtroom buzzed with tension as citizens of Oakridge filed in, drawn by the gravity of what was unfolding. Once a bastion of peace, the town had morphed into a crucible of conflict. And now, as Charles Henderson stood trial for the murder of David Hughes, emotions ran high. Murmurs filled the air, whispers of disbelief mingled with long-held grudges and unspoken fears. Detectives Monroe and Bennett watched from the back, their expressions steeled against the onslaught of vigorous debates. The prosecution painted Charles as a man embittered by years of perceived slights and resentment towards David, overturning every stone they could find to hint at motive. Opening statements highlighted the weeks leading to David's disappearance, an escalating tension over the industrial rezoning, their heated encounters, and even the discovery of the black SUV. Witnesses poured in one by one, recounting the interactions between Charles and David in the days before the murder. A neighbor recalled seeing Charles lurking around the park late at night, his silhouette melding with the shadows, while others testified to overhearing sharp words exchanged between them during council meetings, strained alliances breaking before their eyes. Each testimony twisted the courtroom atmosphere tighter, ensnaring Charles in a web constructed from the threads of others' memories. But the defense team was equally resolute, scrambling to unravel the prosecution's narrative. They painted Charles as a misunderstood handyman, someone who cherished his independence, not the violent criminal the prosecution claimed him to be. His alibi, the defense argued, was solid. He had been working late on an unrelated project. They provided character witnesses who touted his repair skills, portraying him as harmless and industrious. As the trial pressed on, the emotional gravity intensified. Jenna Hughes, David's widow, took the stand, her voice quavering as she relayed the devastating impact of her husband's death. Tears streamed down her face as she recalled their life together. The vacuum left in their family, creating an unresolvable tension that bounced off the walls of the courtroom. The jurors shifted in their seats, empathizing with her pain, offering a mirror to their own existential grief. After weeks of teetering uncertainty filled with gripping testimonies, it all culminated in closing arguments. The jury struggled under the weight of their decision, tasked with deciphering truth from emotion and a case that felt personal, as if the events had splintered into the very essence of their community. Finally, The day arrived for the jury's verdict. The gallery held its breath, a collective heartbeat echoing in the air as they filed in. Anticipation crackling like electricity, with eyes fixed on the foreman. The courtroom awaited a delivery that would either heal or fracture the fragile bonds within Oakridge. We, the jury, find the defendant, the words hung suspended, defining the next chapter for not only Charles and David's families, but for an entire town looming at the edge of dark. The aftermath, the verdict echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap, reverberating far beyond the walls where it was delivered. Charles Henderson was found guilty of second-degree murder. Gasps enveloped the room, while ensconced emotions broke free. Cries erupted from Jenna, tears transforming despair into a palpable release, and murmurs of disbelief ricocheted from the justice in the form of retribution had been claimed, but it left behind jagged fragments as well unsettled spirits roaming the town. In the weeks that followed, Oakridge was cloaked in an uneasy silence. What had once thrived under the warmth of shared community bonds now seemed haunted by shadows. The familiar sounds of laughter in parks faded, replaced by stiff interactions and whispered conversations. A sense of distrust rippled through familiar faces. How well did they really know each other? Had the lines of loyalty twisted in the dark? Rachel and Eric, still processing the turmoil of the trial, set out to wrap up loose ends from the investigation. As they sifted through evidence from the case, a nagging feeling clawed at Rachel's mind. She sought out those connections again, revisiting statements long dismissed. One night, while analyzing crumpled notes in her office, she stumbled upon a name that had slipped their analysis. Jacob, David's former campaign strategist. Digging deeper into Jacob's past revealed a tangled history with Clark, the developer who had stood on the fringes of conflict throughout the investigation. Rumors began to emerge, a business deal gone sour, a rivalry brewing over the potential industrial development. Was Jacob merely a distant player, or had he been orchestrating events from the shadows, igniting tensions for personal gain? Meanwhile, Jenna attempted to rebuild her life amidst the wreckage of loss. The town's tributes to David blossomed into a park project dedicated to his memory, an effort to uplift the community he had cherished. But even as flowers bloomed in his name, the emotional scars lingered like the bitter scent trailing behind a summer storm, reminders of fragility buried deep in the town's heart. The fallout from the trial left no one unchanged. The fallout from the trial left no one unchecked. For Jenna, it was a bittersweet endeavor, an attempt to forge a new path alongside old memories. Rachel and Eric continued their probing into Jacob's intricate web, realizing that while Charles had been a pawn in the larger game, the true motivations behind David's demise echoed loud. As Oakridge's residents grappled with their intertwined fates, the profound question loomed: what price would they have to pay for the truth? The storm clouds might have dissipated, but the remnants of conflict were just beginning to reveal themselves. Reflection. Water is shifted in Oakridge, the vibrant hues of autumn fading into the starkness of winter. A chill in the air could be felt as a collective shiver running through the town, a reminder of the profound loss. Every corner seemed to carry a ghostly trace of David Hughes, his absence an ache that woven through friendships and alliances now stained with mistrust. For Rachel Monroe, the weight of the case lingered in her thoughts, an unresolved note that haunted her late into the evenings. Each piece of evidence they unearthed only deepened the complexity as they had initially overlooked, especially as whispers of Jacob's involvement loomed larger in her mind. Had the incident ignited a path of betrayal and ambition among those who claimed to know David best? As the snow fell gently, blanketing the town in serenity, Rachel found a quiet resolution. She had fought for justice, but truth stretched far beyond a courtroom verdict. She hoped the new park dedicated to David would soften the sharp edges of his memory, forging a place where healing could take. The townspeople began to gather there, sharing stories, laughter, and tears, illuminating the path from grief to renewal. Jenna stood at the heart of it, embodying resilience as she found comfort among friends, holding on to the legacy of love that David had left behind.